Can you get stronger in handling life situations? Of course. But you got to go to work on yourself. You can't blame out there wishing it was easier. Wish you were stronger. I've been lecturing now for 33 years, and I'm telling you, today versus 33 years ago, I'm better. First time I gave a talk, I stood up, my mind sat back down. I've been through that whole deal. Opened my mouth, nothing came out for a while. My knees are banging together, the sweat's pouring off my face, I'm shaking like a leaf. It's called terror, in case you haven't tried it as first attempts. But I'm telling you, I got through it, and I did it again, and I got through it, and I did it again, and I got through it. And now, of course, I can lecture for a few hours in one day.
People take so much offense to me. You will never learn from people if we always tap dance around the truth. We tap dance around the truth by finding the right words so I don't hurt you because you have thin skin. No, tighten up, people. It's okay. Trust me, it's okay. You might be called nigger one day. It's okay. You might be called some Jewish word or some faggot or gay word. It's okay. Let them call you that. What are you going to do now? They don't own your life. How are you going to control that now? How are you going to flip it upside down and say, Roger that, now I'm going to harness this shit and you'll read about me years from now? How? That's the question. How are you going to do that? If you have any mental toughness, any ability, if you have any fraction of self-discipline, the ability to not want to do it but still do it. People have a hard thing to understand. I hate to run. And what makes me so crazy, it doesn't anymore, is people go, well, why do you run if you hate it? What are you talking about? I don't want to take showers and eat either. I hate that too. That's life, man. It wasn't until I changed that mentality that I became somebody. I hated going to school, so guess what? I was dumb as shit. That's what, 1 + 1 is 2. But if you can get through to doing things that you hate to do, on the other side is greatness. That's what people understand. By me running, I am callous in my mind. I'm not training for a race. I'm training for life. I'm training for the time when I get that 2 o'clock in the morning call that my mom is dead or something happens tragic in life. I don't fall apart. I'm training my mind and my body and my spirit so it's all one, so I can handle what life is going to throw at me. Because the life I've lived, it throws a whole bunch at you. And if you're not physically and mentally prepared for that, you're just going to crumble and you're good for nobody. Thicken your skin. Become more of a human being. Don't be afraid of the reflection in the mirror, because that's all you can be afraid of. Once you overcome the reflection in the mirror, you've done it.
If you want to live a good, long, flourishing life, you got to push back. You can't just give in. You got to push back. And we're dealing with some serious matters here. We're here to instruct. We're here to grow. We're here to learn. We're here to get the best we possibly can. One ancient novelist said, these are the best of times and these are the worst of times. Right? If you've had a bad week, just sit down and ponder that for a while. Study it. See if you can't pick up some ideas from a poor week and then make a better week. In spite of the winters, in spite of the downturn, the money downturn, the social downturn, the personal downturn, whatever it is, you can develop the courage muscle. You can develop the inspiration muscle. You can develop the dedication muscle. You can get stronger. There isn't anybody here that can't get stronger. Next time we see you, may not even recognize you, how strong you're going to be able to become in language, in style, and personality, the ability to cope, the ability to handle with anything that happens, no matter what happens.
People can get unbelievably tough. So the trick for human thriving in the face of suffering and malevolence is strength, not protection. It's a completely different idea. We also know this clinically. We know, for example, that if you treat people with exposure therapy for agoraphobia, which is, roughly speaking, the fear of chaos, I would say, the fear of everything, you don't make them less afraid. You make them braver. It's not the same thing. Because with an agoraphobic, see, what happens to them is the fall. They never conceptualize death and suffering. They're naive, right? It never enters the theater of their imagination, and it's because they're protected from it. But then something happens. This often happens to women in their 40s, because they're the people most likely to develop agoraphobia. Something happens, they've been protected from chaos by authority their entire life. So maybe they had an overprotective father, and then they went to an overprotective boyfriend, and then they went to an overprotective husband. And maybe they were willing to be subjugated to all three of those because of the protection, right? So that's the bargain. They stay weak and dependent, and maybe they have to because that's the only way they can appeal to the person who's hyperprotective, but the price they pay for that is that they're not sufficiently competent. And then something happens in their life, often in their 40s, they develop heart palpitations, maybe as a consequence of menopause. Their heart starts to beat erratically and they think, oh no, death. It's like, well, who are you going to talk to about that? Right? There's no protection from authority for that. Or maybe their friend gets divorced, or maybe their sister dies, or something like that. It brings up the specter of mortality and maybe the specter of malevolence and mortality. And it brings it up in a way that authority, recourse to authority, cannot solve. And so then they have panic attacks. What happens? They go out, they get afraid, they feel their heart beating, then they get afraid of their heart beating because they think, oh no, I'm going to die. And they think, oh no, I'm going to die, and I'm going to make a fool of myself while I'm doing it and attract a lot of attention. So the two big fears come up: mortality and social judgment. And then they have a panic attack. It's like fight or flight's gone out of control. Very, very unpleasant. Then they start to avoid the places they've had a panic attack. Then they end up not being able to go anywhere. So then Tiamat has come back, right? A huge monster, a little victim. And so what do you do with them? Well, there's no saying, no, there's no Tiamat. That's done, right? Their naivety is over. They've had a direct contact with the threat of mortality and social judgment. They've met the terrible mother and they've met the terrible father. And there's no going back. There's no saying, oh, the world is safe. It's not safe. Not at all. It's not safe. The fact that you think it's safe means that you were living in an unconscious bubble that was sort of provided to you by your culture. It's a gift. And now that's been shattered. And so now what do you do? Well, the answer is you retreat until you're in your house and there's nowhere you can go. You're the ultimate frozen rabbit, right? And your life is hell because you can't function. The alternative is, let's take apart the things you're afraid of. Let's expose you to them, carefully and programmatically. And then you'll learn that you're actually tougher than you think. You never knew that. And maybe you didn't want to take on the responsibility because, people play a role in their own demise, so to speak. When you had opportunity to go out and explore or withdraw because you were afraid, you chose to withdraw because you were afraid. So it's not only that you were overprotected often, it's that you were willing to take advantage of the fact that you were overprotected and run back there whenever you had the opportunity. So maybe you're a kid in the playground, right? And you're having some trouble with other kids. And in the back of your mind, I should deal with this myself. But you go and tell your mom and get her to intervene. And you know that that's not right. You know that you're breaking the social contract. But it's easier. And so that's what you do. You run off to an authority figure and hide behind the great father, right? Roughly speaking. Well, the problem with that is you don't learn how to do it yourself. So then you have to relearn it painfully when you're 40. So then you take people out. You say, well, what are you afraid of? Rank it from 1 to 10. So 10 is, make a list of 10 things you're afraid of. The thing you're least afraid of, we'll call number 10. So we'll start with that. Okay, well, I'm afraid of elevators. Okay, well, let's look at a picture of an elevator. Let's have you imagine being in an elevator. Let's go out to an elevator and let you watch the terrible jaws of death open, because that's how you're responding to it symbolically, right? And you're going to do that at the closest proximity you can manage. You find out, you go do that, it works. You're nervous as hell, especially from an anticipatory perspective. Shaking. You go out, you stop, you watch it happen, and you actually calm down. You do that 10 times and it no longer bothers you. Well, what you've learned that you didn't die, but more importantly than that, you've learned that you could withstand the threat of death. That's what you've learned. And then you move a little closer, and then you move a little closer, and then you move a little closer, and finally you're back in what's no longer the elevator from a symbolic perspective. It's a tomb, right? It's a place of enclosure and isolation. And you learn, turns out I can withstand that. And then you're much more together, much more confident. And that's often one of the things that often happens in situations like that. I've seen this multiple times, is that if you run someone through an exposure training process like that and toughen them up, they'll often start standing up to people around them in a way they never did before, because they wouldn't stand up for themselves before because they weren't willing to undermine the protection. See, if you're protecting me, I can't bother you because I can't afford to forsake your protection. So if I'm going to play that game, I'm going to hide behind you, then I can't challenge you. So that's no good, because that's sometimes why people, you see this with guys very frequently, they're still deathly afraid of their father's judgment when they're in their 30s or 40s. It's like, well, why? No, because they still want to believe that there's someone out there that knows. And so they're willing to accept the subjugation because it doesn't force them to challenge the idea that there's someone out there that knows. Because that's the advantage of having your father as a judge, right? Because he knows. Well, what if he doesn't? What if no one knows any better than you? Well, that's a rough thing. You don't, until you realize that, you're not an adult, right? That's really technically the point of realization of adulthood, is that no one actually knows what you should do more than you do. I mean, it's a horrible realization, because what the hell do you know? It's a terrible realization, and people will often pick slavery, permanent slavery, to the spirit of the Great Father, let's say, over that realization, and it's completely understandable. But the problem with it is that there's more to you than you think, and so if you continue to hide behind that figure, then you never have a chance to understand that there's more to you than you think, far more to you than you think. Maybe there's enough to you so that you can actually withstand the threat of mortality without collapsing. Maybe even withstand the threat of malevolence without collapsing. Who knows? It's certainly possible.
And mental toughness is the ability to handle enormous setbacks. You'll find that every winner, like Lance Armstrong, can handle the fall or the cancer and handle it because they have the mental toughness to continue to persevere. The problem traits are ones I worry about, because in our society, we live in a skin-deep celebrity culture, and we have this lack of self-control. We have people that are off the wall, they get angry, there's road rage, job rage, every kind of rage, air rage. Everyone gets upset all the time over trifles. People look at me and say, you big, fat, dumb klutz, we hate you, your religion, your mother, and your country. I said, really? That's interesting, I'll give that some thought, maybe. We hate you. You got a big nose, big ears, buck teeth, and you're not as good as Tony Robbins. I said, I'm into a self-improvement program and need lots of encouragement. Thank you. They said we didn't mean it as encouragement. I said, that's okay, I took it that way anyway. I haven't been angry in 20 years. No one's tried to kill me. The only way I get angry is if they're victimizing some young child or somebody who's in need. I get angry with victimizing, but I don't get angry with people who say things. I mean, people differ all the time. So don't worry about any of that. Lack of self-control. Inflexibility is when you're so narrow that everyone's wrong because you think you're right. If I've learned anything, it's to be flexible, to accommodate opinions without having to embrace them. The most difficult thing in our society is over-emotionality, because it's difficult to change, because it's usually either a combination of inborn, but especially as young children. What I really worry about are homes that get all upset and fly off the handle and start arguing and get this big off-the-wall kind of thing. Emotionality should be no problem, can do. You see the accident, you pull out the flares, you direct the traffic. The time to really get cool is when things are really tough. And the people who are overly emotional can really be swayed by the media and the sound bites. I want to set myself free. I'm tired of having the media control me. You'll never outgrow the limitations. You'll only set new ones within which you must live. Everyone has an income limitation. They believe they're only worth so much. Add a zero. I dare you to add a zero on your income. You'll find that you're as good as the best, but no better than the rest, but as good as the best. If you can separate your limits, which are age, maybe physical characteristics, limitations are psychological. And of course, the ones we place on ourselves are the biggest ones of all. I've always said that POW, prisoner of war, Prince of Wales, putting on weight, power of women, psychology of winning. POW is a bumper sticker. It doesn't mean anything unless you have experience with it. Little boy looked at POW, P-O-W, he went, pow. I said, yeah, pow to you, P-O-W, Prince of Wales to me. He said, putting on weight to you, sir. You are who you were until now. You will become what you've learned this weekend over 250,000 hours of past conditioning if you're 40. So if you're 40 years old, you'll get 12 hours over 250,000. You will not have a life-changing experience unless you reorganize the iceberg, the denominator. View where you came from differently than you now view it. Failure is fertilizer. It's a learning experience. Don't wallow in it, grow from it. Never carry failure forward. It's an event, not a person. There are no failures. There are just learning experiences. Future behavior is based on re-recording on top of the old conditioning, which you cannot erase. New information.
You've got the brains, you've got the stamina, you've got the vitality, you've got the interest, you've got your life ahead of you, you've got the future. You can do it. If anybody can do it, you can do it. If one of us can do it, hey, we all can do it. If we can read, you can read. If we can change, you can change. If we can figure it out, you can figure it out. If we can turn it around, you can turn it around. There isn't anything you can't accomplish.